was a weird Bible reading, and it's okay because we're going to work through it together. Some of the Bible is a little bit obscure. Some of it is full of imagery and difficult imagery and ideas that help us to unpack really difficult truths for us. And I have decided that we would do this series of Revelation. And so it was only fair that I did the two weirdest churches. And so here I am to present to you the churches of Pergamum and Thyatira. And they are really, really interesting letters. Now, let's just rewind a minute in case you weren't here last week. Why are we reading Revelation? Revelation is one revelation, not revelations, revelation of John, who is imprisoned or exiled on an island called Patmos, a nice holiday destination these days, but at the time was quite like a rural place away from the Roman Empire. And so John is sent there, and he has this revelation that he sends to the churches listed in the letter. And the idea is it comes from the Spirit of Jesus. It comes to bring truth, difficult truth, but encouragement as well. So last week, I believe you looked at Philadelphia and Sardis, and today we are looking at Thyatira and Pergamum. These two letters follow one another. We're not doing them in order because of various reasons, but these two do follow one another, and they have lots of common themes, which is why we're looking at them together. Now, something that's really, really, really key that we understand about the book of Revelation is that it isn't a secret code about future events. In fact, it is a letter written at the time for those churches in that present, so John's contemporaries, and it's full of code, but it's not code as in like, you've got to try and work it out. It's all rooted in the history of the Hebrew scriptures. And so in these two letters, there is some references that we're going to unpack in a minute, but it's all written to understand the present, not to unlock the future. Does that make sense? Okay, some people will read Revelation in that way. I'm not sure it was written with that intention, okay? And a scholar is very helpful. I've forgotten his name. Roland is really, really, really helpful because he writes this. He says, what this text encourages and requires is not preoccupation with the letter, i.e., don't get bogged down, okay? Instead, it calls us to move through the letter to the Spirit, not to become so bogged down in the minutiae of the symbolic detail that we fail to experience further imaginative insight into the ways of God and the world. I.e., don't worry about the weird stuff, okay? Some of it has meaning, some of it is just weird stuff, and you can look into that in your own time. But the most important thing is that we understand that this is a letter, it's a prophetic letter, so it's somebody writing to expose truth in the churches at that time, and the truth of the Spirit. And so if what you've just read is a bit scary or a bit obscure to you, that's okay. We'll unpack some of that together now. And some of it you can do in your own time, and some of it you don't have to. Move on with your lives. Let's move on. Okay, so the two churches, let me give you some context. Okay, so we've got Pergamum and Thyatira. They're both quite different cities. So Pergamum on the left here, on my next slide, this is a reenactment of drawing of Pergamum, and it was a religious center, so not a trade center, a religious center. And those of you that might have gone there will know that there's a big acropolis at the top of a big hill where there was an altar of Zeus. And some scholars believe that this altar was burning 24/7. So this was a center of worship, but not worship of Yahweh, of God, other gods. And they are praised for being steadfast in persecution, so that when there's been times of persecution, they have kept the name of Jesus. But Pergamum was this kind of like literary center, i.e. it was the largest library in the world. And so where it describes that Satan had its throne, some of that is because the literal shape of the town. Mum, you've been there, haven't you? Yeah, it's like there's a big hill with a big altar on the top that looks like a big throne. Do you see what I mean? It's a bit like Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, but bigger, okay? So some of that imagery that we're reading and sounds a bit much it's about an allusion to the physical kind of setup of the town and the purpose of that setup and how it's being used. Thyatira, on the other hand, and the next stop along, was a smaller place, and it was actually the smallest church out of the 7 churches of Revelation. But it was well known for its trade guilds, and it's praised for love, service, perseverance, and doing more than it had done before. It was growing. It was a place that was succeeding. And this was a town that was kind of full of tradespeople, of leather workers and candle makers and wool people that do stuff with wool, tailors and dyers. And so it was a working class town of trades, not a literary capital of the world. Do we understand the differences? Okay. And so that's really interesting, because to me, if we go on to the next slide, you'll see that there are elements of these 2 letters, that are almost identical. Can you see there that you have been enticed into sin, so that they ate food sacrificed to the idols and committed sexual immorality? It's almost the same. And so what that tells us is that the issues that are coming up in these letters isn't specific to those places or those people. This is a human issue. This is a human issue. And so if it applied in both of those places, there's a good chance it applies to us today. And the key issue at the heart of both of these letters, and the problem that Jesus is raising, the Spirit of Jesus is raising, is the idea of idolatry. And he uses, in this letter, he mentions 2 different names. We've got Balaam there and Jezebel. Okay, so Jezebel, I think, is probably the better known. And we have talked about Jezebel recently. I think actually Lindsay Gilman pretended to be Jezebel for me. So when we talked about Elijah, do you remember? And Elijah was a prophet to King Ahab, who was married to Jezebel. Jezebel was like an outside queen that came in, and she seduce them into doing naughty things, okay? And that's Jezebel. That's the story of Jezebel. And there's a very key story, I think, with Naboth, who she decides that she wants his vineyard. She decides that they would have the vineyard. And so she kind of persuades Ahab into murdering Naboth for this vineyard. Okay, so she chooses that the vineyard is more important than the man's life. And that becomes kind of acceptable to the bigger purpose. Now, the other reference that you might know, anyone know about Balaam? What do we know about Balaam? The key thing is donkey. Okay, he's known for the donkey. That's the donkey that talks. I am really going through the strange bits of scripture this morning. So Balaam has a donkey that talks. But basically, Balaam is a diviner. Am I saying that right? Diviner, thank you for the feedback. A diviner, somebody who is basically like a spiritual person who's up for hire. And so Balak, who is the Moab king, basically asks, what's his name? Balaam, thank you, to come and curse Israel. And the angel talks to the donkey talks to him and says, no, it's not going to happen. You're not going to curse God's people. You cannot curse them. But Balaam still wants Balak's money. He wants to get kind of the job done, but he's told he's not allowed to curse them. In fact, he ends up blessing them. But the way that he gets around this is that he tempts them into compromise. And so he sends like all these women and naughty foods and all the things that the Israelites shouldn't be doing to defeat them. Not by opposing them, not by cursing them, but by causing them to compromise on their values and the way that they had agreed to live. And so they set up a new kind of culture about what is acceptable within Israel, and it causes Israel to fail. So do we see the common similarities in these 2 stories? Okay. And so the author, John, is using these stories, which are in Israel's past, to point out what is happening in the present, in these churches in Revelation. And to say that idolatry and compromise is rife in your communities, but it looks different. And this is how it looks different. So in Pergamum, we have a pragmatic compromise that's based on external pressures. Sorry, Carl, next slide. Thank you. It's external pressures. So because the culture of the city is a certain way, to what you would hear is, we believe in God, but we still need to be able to manage in this city. And this is the culture of this city. We're academics, we're religious. So this is the way that we end up getting pressured. This is the outside pressure. In Thyatira, it's the same result, but it sounds different, which is it's relational, it's seductive. It's somebody within the community who is compromised. who says things like, oh, you don't need to be so rigid. God understands. No, we can do it this way. And that sounds different, but the outcome is the same, isn't it? Which is that essentially God's people are compromised and not doing what they should be doing. And so you might be thinking to me, hey, Ellie, I don't really think idolatry really applies to me. I haven't worshipped any statues in the last week. I don't particularly love bad things, like maybe this is a sermon for someone else. But David Foster Wallace, he's an author, he's not a Christian. He wrote one of the most powerful commencement speeches I've ever heard. I encourage you in your own time to go and listen to it. It might not be your cup of tea. It was mine, and it may cause you to do some thinking, which is nice as well. But it says this, and there's 3 slides of this, and Ben told me this is too much to have in one quote, but it's so good I didn't want to cut it out. So he says this: in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice that we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else that you worship will eat you alive. He goes on to say this: if you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. You will never feel you have enough. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally grieve you. Worship power, and you will end up feeling weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to numb you to your own fear. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. And here is the key thing that he says here. But the insidious thing about all these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful of themselves, it's that they're unconscious. They're default settings. They're the kind of worship that you gradually slip into day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value without ever being fully aware of what you're doing. The reality is that idolatry for each of us is misdirected loyalty in a world of competing claims. And so idolatry is about worshipping often good things, but too much, giving them too much value in our lives and allowing them to make the decisions. Augustine says this. Sorry, Carl, this is the funny slide. It says this: the essence of sin is disordered love. The essence of sin is disordered love. Not loving necessarily bad things, but loving good things too much. And what does that look like in the church today? What does Pergamum and Thyatira look like in our churches today? Well, in Pergamum, it looks like where culture, outside culture, has allowed to distort our values and our love. Tim Keller tells a really good analogy for this, and he talks about how he's from Manhattan, and often people from Manhattan really love Manhattan, and they talk about being from Manhattan quite a lot. And he talks about how he would consider that most people in Manhattan would consider themselves civilized, thinking people who would look on issues like child sacrifice as absolutely barbaric and backwards and really, really, really awful. And so when they look at a story like Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, I told you we're doing all the weird passages this morning, okay? So if we look at the screen, there's a passage where Abraham has wanted a child and waited for a child for 25 years. In the time that he's been waiting for this child, he's gone and tried and done it in his own strength in having Ishmael. But Isaac arrives. And this passage, one of the weirdest bits of the Bible, where God instructs Abraham to take this beautiful child, this gift, up to the top of a mountain and to sacrifice him. For us, we might look at this and think, oh, this is so barbaric. This is so backwards. How could you do this? We might look at this scripture in other parts of the world where perhaps this is still practiced and consider that this is absolutely insane how anyone could make that choice. But the test here for Abraham is, do you love the gift more than the giver? Do you love the gift more than the giver? And this is a prime example how idolatry can be loving something good, but loving it too much. And Tim Keller would say that lots of Manhattan people might look at this and say, that's absolutely ridiculous. How could you love your child more than God? How could you love something else more than your child? But in Manhattan, you'll find lots of people have jobs that are suddenly more important than their home life. So in our culture today, there are accepted kind of values that we live amidst that disorder our priorities, don't they? They disorder the things that we love and make us love things more than we should. And so distorted cultural kind of influences in Pergamum exist in our church today. And it's important that we challenge them, that we recognize that some things and some cultural things may be becoming more important than worship and discipleship, more important than the people around us, more important than the people in our church. And the letter to Thyatira is a really interesting one. This week I watched the documentary by Matt Redman talking about Soul Survivor, and some of you will be familiar with the story of Mike Pilavachi there and the awful abuses of power that happened within a church at a time that was so growing and charismatic. And the story of Jezebel and the letter to Thyatira is an important reminder to the church today and the church then that the cult of personality is a dangerous, dangerous threat to the church. That where one voice and their value exceeds loyalty to God and what is right, that is dangerous. And this letter exposes a pattern throughout church history of scandal where churches have tolerated to the point of being complicit. And if you read the text, it says here, you have tolerated Jezebel. What are we tolerating that we shouldn't be? What are we tolerating to the point that we are complicit? What do we have knowledge of but we have not spoken up against? Because in that documentary, you hear a lot of phrases like, well, that's just Mike. And the success of the movement allowed charisma and reputation to delay action and blur boundaries. But this letter reminds us really, really powerfully that the faithfulness of a church is not only measured by its success or by its action or its desire to love people, but by its ability and courage to name that which is harmful to the minority. What idols are in our church that we are tolerating? What scandals, what injustices do we need to name? What do we need to bring to the light? And at the heart of both of these types of idolatry is this truth, which is found in Romans 1:25. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and they worshipped and served a created thing rather than a creator. Worshipping a created thing rather than a creator. And the danger and the problem with worshipping something that is created is ultimately that it cannot bear the weight of our hope and the expectation that we have for each of our lives. And so if we place all of our value and all of our meaning on something that is created, even if it is a good thing, it will crumble in time. If we place our value and our meaning on getting a particular job, we will wake up the day after we receive that job and we will still be with ourselves. If we place our value and our meaning on being a good parent and doing that really right, we will love our children with such an intensity that there'll be a pressure that should never be there. And that could ultimately destroy a relationship and leave harm in its wake. If we spend our lives giving ourselves meaning by having a romantic partner and pleasing them, we will allow ourselves to live with no boundaries and always listen to what somebody else has to say about us. If we live constantly wanting to be excellent, as David Foster Wallace said, we will constantly feel not excellent. We will constantly feel that we are a failure. And so none of these created things can hold the weight of what we have in terms of hoping to be human and to achieve fullness in our lives. And it's what Tim Keller ultimately describes as is the difference between a good thing, a great thing, a wonderful thing in our lives, and the ultimate thing. Because our lives are full of good things, great things, blessings, things that come to bring our lives wealth, but they are not the ultimate thing. The ultimate thing is being created, worshipping a creator. And only that creator can bear the weight of what we carry in our expectation to be human and to succeed and to have meaningful lives. It is only God that can hold the weight of that. And so the question for each of us this morning is, in helping us to identify our idols, is what are you living for? Now that's quite a tricky question to answer. And so I think the better question is this one. What is your worst nightmare? What if you lost would leave you with little meaning to your life? What if you lost would leave you with very little meaning in your lives? If you lost the approval of a person or your parents, would it leave you with nothing? If you lost the house, the car, the job, would it leave you with so little that it didn't feel like worth going on? If you lost that job or your reputation, would it be too much to bear? And the chances are is that if you can name something in your life that would be too painful to live without, it might just be an ultimate thing to you and not just a good thing. And the important reminder of this letter is to let good things be good things, but they cannot bear the weight of our expectation and of our hopes and our desires. Let good things be good things, but there is only one ultimate thing. Now, this is a difficult passage. This is a difficult idea. And Roth says this, and I think this summarizes some of the difficulty with this really well. It says, it is a difficult message in a growing non-judgmental age when individuals' relationship to culture is seen as that person's responsibility, a matter judged by God alone. And I think this is complicated by the fact that we live in a society now where we can inhale as much kind of data in one day as people did 500 years ago in their whole lives. 500 years ago, people would be exposed to the ideas of their family, their community, their village, perhaps the places that they traveled to. But now you and I can log on to our devices and feel part of a community and feel like we're hearing lots of voices that are expressing our opinions. And we might feel that everyone feels the same way that we do. But they're actually a very niche subset of an online community. And this is where we see ideas held by all sorts of people without accountability, because they're not rooted in true community. They're not rooted in the diversity of a community such as this one. And it's difficult because it's very easy for us in this time of a marketplace of ideas that can fill our lives and our times and our thoughts and our thinking, to become influenced by something or a pattern of thinking and prioritize things that we shouldn't be prioritizing because we think that that's what everyone else is doing, because that's what we're hearing and that's what we're reading. And so the challenge for us is to remain rooted in a real community, a flesh and blood community such as this one, and to hold the ideas that we have account, and to discuss openly the places and the people and the ideas that have become idols. At the carol service last December, This is a really minor example. But do you remember the carol service? It was beautiful. The children did very well. The adults did beautifully as well. But before the carol service, there was a little bit of a stress at the back desk. I think you might remember it, Carl, because the lighting deck wasn't working. The lighting deck wasn't working. And it was really, really frustrating because we wanted the jazzy lights to make the carol service feel really special and to look really special. And I was really grumpy that the lighting deck wasn't working. And I was like kind of thinking, oh my gosh, what are we going to do if the lighting deck doesn't work? Oh my gosh. And the joke is, in all my years of officership, this is the first corps I've ever been in with a lighting deck. Actually, lots of churches don't have a lighting deck. Jesus never had a lighting deck. It's not important. But something had seeped into my mind that how things look was more important than what happened in worship that morning. And I was in a stinker of a mood until I remembered my previous appointment with its strict fluorescent lighting and the beautiful things that happened in that hall. And it's very, very, very easy, isn't it, for us, for those kind of really little things to mask the beautiful ultimate things. And that's a form of idolatry. It's where certain values become more important than God's word and God's truth and God doing something in this place. And so we need to ask ourselves very honestly and quite painfully is what values have seeped into our church life that are given more importance than they should? Where do we need to actually say, yeah, it's really good to have a lighting deck, but it is not the ultimate thing. It's really good for things to look or feel a certain way. It's really good for us to have this and this. But are they being given more importance than they should? Are they running the show? Are they driving this church more than the ultimate thing? And so the question for us this morning, as individuals but as a church, is this: what emotions, what desires are driving your life? Because if it is a desire or an emotion that isn't an ultimate thing, you are enslaved to it. It's a dramatic term, but we are enslaved to it. If something other than the ultimate thing is driving our lives, we are enslaved to something that we shouldn't be. And so this concept of idolatry, which I really didn't fancy preaching on, and really felt far away from our lives, is actually really, really, really relevant, isn't it? Because all sorts of values and ideas and emotions and desires can be giving us the momentum, but they're not the ultimate thing. And so it's important that we identify the places where we might be drifting and that we move towards discernment, that we identify the places where we are fitting in with our culture and move towards faithfulness. It's important that we identify those places where we're going for convenience and we look again for loyalty. And the promise that comes at the end of these two very strange letters of what Jesus brings to those who are faithful is important here. Because we're promised hidden manna and authority and the morning star. What on earth does that mean? Well, manna is bread, it's sustenance, isn't it? That's another key or code to another story in the Old Testament where God provides manna. So where we desire faithfulness, we will be giving sustenance to endure a system that drains us. We will be given authority, real power, not borrowed power, not power over others, but authority from God. And the morning star, that's a piece of imagery to talk about that hope beyond the present age. That something else is coming, that we will live in a time that doesn't feel like this, that isn't like this. John in a minute is going to come and play to us, And we're going to take a few minutes. And I want, if we could just leave the slide that says which emotions are driving your life, to take time as John is playing for you to consider, what is it that is driving your life? What is shaping the direction of your life? What's shaping our church? What values or practices have become the ultimate thing rather than just being a good thing? Let's reflect.